So Nigel, thanks for talking with the London Magazine. So how are you now after the ordeal of your trial?
Well, I'm getting there. It's a description that I use time and time again when MPs come up to me and say, "How are things, Nigel? Glad to see you back." And getting there, I think, probably best sums it up, because I haven't finally got there. The ordeal was not just the period of the trial, which lasted 5 weeks. It was 11 months and 3/4 of the period from when the police knocked on the door 7:30 one Saturday morning. And I think it'll only be truly finished when we get over the next general election and I can see a new chapter opening.
How has the process of the case affected your view of the processes of the Crown Prosecution Service and the police in the respect of granting anonymity to accusers but not the accused?
Well, this was something that was changed in 1988. I looking at it now, and you can read it and try and look at it dispassionately and see the reasons for doing it. I can see the impact it's had on me and indeed the impact it's had on other people. I'll give you one example. The president of the Oxford Student Union has been accused of rape and attempted rape. He's 21 years of age. He was on the front page of the Daily Mail and has been on the front page of several other newspapers. Just Google search his name. The impact that that will have on his life and is having on his life will be immense. Now, he hasn't been charged. Maybe he will never be charged. But the fact is that the information is now out there and it does have an enormous impact. Therefore, I think it's only right that we get back to the position as it was in 1988, that there is some sort of parity and anonymity until charge. And then I believe that that is a bit of a game changer and that's where we move on.
Is there anything that you're personally intending to try to achieve with regard to the anonymity of suspects?
Yes, I'm looking to get the law changed. I just want to get it back to where it was. Now, prior to the 2010 general election, I understand that there was a consensus between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives that that's exactly what would happen, and Ken Clarke was leading the charge. And it appears that when he looked behind him, there was nobody behind him, so he was charging on his own. And nobody sort of owned up to any ownership of that particular policy. I've spoken to Ken since the knock on the door in 2013, and I've said how unfair I thought it was, and I believe that he is still committed to that change. There are other members of Parliament too who believe that it is unfair. And so I believe that a step-by-step approach, and I think the first thing to do is to have the Home Affairs Select Committee look at it under the chairmanship of Keith Vaz. You've there got a number of members of Parliament, totally independent, and I think the important thing whenever you're looking at a change is look at the unintended consequences. And the unintended consequences may be so great that they decide not to make that change. I'm certainly not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination. I've just gone through the trauma of it, that's all. So let that committee look at every avenue. Let them get evidence from a number of people who've come across either pro or against the change in legislation, and then let's get at least a considered version of affairs coming before the House, so then we can decide whether it's a change that's worth having. Personally, I think that it is a change worth having, and that's the approach that I'll be taking.
The Andrew Mitchell case has revealed some interesting points regarding the possible politicisation of the police. For instance, a text message from one PC stationed at 10 Downing Street saying, "I can bring the government down." Have the police, in your view, become politicised and or anti-conservative?
I think that Plebgate opens a new sort of arena for members of Parliament who've looked at this and are aghast at several levels. The fact that it's taken so long and we still haven't got a resolution is quite alarming. The fact that so many lies had been told during the process is alarming, and indeed police officers have lost their jobs, and you know that is regrettable. But the fact is that had Andrew Mitchell not recorded the meeting that he had with the Police Federation in his office, then their version of events would have gone only contested by him. As it is now, there is evidence that they told lies. And that has got to be incredibly disturbing. Now, there are rotten apples in every profession, including that of Parliament. And so clearly there has been real issues here. There are, I think, a number of investigations ongoing at this moment in time, and they need to be resolved. But what I do hope for Andrew Mitchell is that they get a resolution of this as quickly as possible, because the hell that I endured was a year and I had to go through a trial. Andrew is going through the hell that he started over 2 years ago. It's cost him his job in the cabinet. It's clearly had some reputational damage. And I just believe that for some sort of justice, that this needs now to be brought to a resolution, and somebody needs to say, what the hell's going on here? Why has it gone on for so long?
How do you see your trial in the context of the wider sexual abuse cases that have occurred in the wake of Operation Yewtree?
This is a real issue for me, because I've looked at a number of these cases. I know that during my own case, people were asked to go back 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and in some cases 10 years. And to expect people to even remember what they were doing in certain circumstances 10 years ago when they didn't think anything had happened is testing, to say the least. When you're asked to go back 30 and 40 years where there's little evidence around, I think that's got to be even more difficult. And what we've seen in the case of Bill Roach, where in one case even the lady herself couldn't remember anything. You know, that was dismissed immediately. Questions have got to be asked, and I suppose a view as to whether the Crown Prosecution Service is now the right vehicle to say that this should go forward to charge. I know the pressure that's on them, because clearly at one stage they may have been seen as being too lax, and it's the same with the police, that they were too lax. They were told things under the Jimmy Savile case which were not pursued. Now it seems as if it's gone, the pendulum has swung the other way to such an extent that anybody is now being sort of trapped under the suspicion. And we've seen a number of people, which goes back to my anonymity point about Jim Davidson and Jimmy Tarbuck, who were people that were accused, and in the end no charges were brought. Freddie Starr. Now Freddie Starr's a real case in point. You've seen pictures of him before the knock on the door, pictures of him afterwards. This is a broken man, and yet no charges were brought. So there is a real issue over some of these things. So the pressure on the Crown Prosecution Service in many cases is just to say, well, heck, we better go ahead and have a trial. And I just think that maybe in some of these historic cases, I'm not saying no, because clearly if somebody has been raped or molested, then people should be brought to justice. But in these historic cases, I think it may well be that the evidence that is put forward should be looked at maybe 3 judges, where they know how a case would play out in court. They'll know what is believable and not believable, and whether there is any vigorousness in the case that's being brought forward, and let them decide whether the case is going to come to court or not.
Now, there's a widespread belief that the Palace of Westminster is home to a boozy party culture. How would you see yourself within the context of this culture?
Yes, I have to say that when I heard some of the stories that were told, you know, there are rare occurrences, and they do make the press, and we saw it with the Eric Joyce case, and that's rather sad, and Eric has paid a very heavy price for that. But if I was to take you across to the bar of the House of Commons on any other night than the Eric Joyce incident, you wouldn't see any of the things that have been portrayed in the House of Commons. One of the favourite statistics every year by the press is how much alcohol is drunk on the premises of Parliament, and it's quite a figure. And there's almost an impression given that it's only the 650 MPs that are the ones that are having any drink. Well, there are some MPs who don't go anywhere near the bar. I suspect if you asked them where the bar of the House of Commons was, they would take you into the chamber and say, oh, you mean this thing here where people are brought before the Speaker? No. It's just that simply they wouldn't know, because they never go there. And there are some who are more social, who do use the bar of the House of Commons far more than others. If you go back 20 years, I actually think the culture was a lot more like that, simply because of the late night sittings. Now, the House of Commons only sits until 10 on a Monday and finishes round about 7ish on every other day, and 5 on a Thursday. So the culture, I think, is far less than it ever was, and indeed I think it's far more restrained than it ever was.
So what would you say about the attitude of MPs, peers and your constituents during and post-trial?
Oh, it's been wonderful. I've been really happy with the response that I've got from colleagues of all political parties and friends. I mean, we use the word colleague in Parliament as opposed to friends. And in this instance, I can actually say my colleagues have become my friends. They've been absolutely superb. I've had hugs off all sorts of people, from George Galloway to Glenda Jackson. And all the political leaders at the very beginning of the process showed great sympathy for the pain and trauma that I was going through. And I had the opportunity to even thank Ed Miliband last week at the state opening of Parliament to say, Ed, please thank all your members for being so superb during this period. They were wonderful. There was never any political goal scoring ever used whatsoever. So this place has been wonderful. Even police officers here have come up and patted me on the back. Really pleased to see you back, Mr. Evans. So it's been absolutely superb. And it's the same in my constituency. I walked around Clitheroe with the mayor, Kevin Hawkin, and the number of people that came up and patted me on the back and showed sympathy and support and said how wonderful it is now that it's all over. And I'm asked sometimes, how come it is that you never went bonkers during the period? And I'm amazed myself, because the stress and pressure was absolutely intolerable at times. And it was one of almost disbelief when you were reading stories about yourself in the newspapers. And I believe that the reason why I managed to get through it all with just a bit of meditation, a lot of prayer, and a lot of candle burning was the fact that so many people out there believed in me. And I could always phone them up, or they would phone me, do you want to come for dinner? They were keen to ensure that I was never alone, and all that sort of stuff. And the fact that people were thinking about me, the number of people who wrote to me afterwards, who I don't even know, from emails to Facebook messages. There was well over 2,000 messages. And indeed, when the verdict came in, my phone went absolutely crazy. And it was that knowledge that so many people were thinking about me during the 11 3/4 months of the process was the thing that really did get me through it all.
And what particular books and music sustained you during your trial?
Well, the books mainly were on meditation. And a friend of mine from Skye said, she mentioned one book, The Power of Now. And I'd never heard of it. And she said it had helped her through a period of anguish and pain that she'd had. So she sent me a copy and I read it, and it did help. It sort of explained that whilst you've got lots of fears, the fact is that where you are at this moment in time, things are okay, you're healthy, you've got a lot of friends, people really caring and rooting for you. And what you fear most is probably not going to happen. And in my case, that's exactly right. So that book really was tremendous, and books on mindfulness generally were absolutely superb. Indeed, I met Arianna Huffington just the other day, who's one of the great proponents of mindfulness. And one of the things that I would say to anybody who's going through any trauma whatsoever, just take a bit of time out. It's not as bad as you think it is, and start to read about mindfulness and creating a bit of space for yourself. That's important. And as far as music is concerned, I've gone off pop music from the 20s. I listen to Classic FM quite a bit these days, and I use Spotify to listen to classical music. And during my darkest moments, sometimes when I was waking up at 2:30 in the morning, actually getting onto Spotify, listening to some pastoral music, some classical soft music, was really something that helped calm me down. And the rich beauty of that music really did take me to another place, which is desperately where I needed to be at that time.
Thanks very much for talking with us today.
Thank you.